encounter your current emotional state, you first need to learn the basics of the user interface. We tried to make it intuitive, but there are not many templates for working with artificial life, so we chose efficiency and ergonomics instead. There are numerous interactive panels in the game that become visible in different modes and conditions. If you don't know what a certain panel does, press Q while hovering over it to get a quick tip. Q is the most important key in the game. It gives you information about all the elements of the UI. If that doesn't work out for you, or if you want to learn about the elements of virtual reality or games controls, visit the Help section of the main menu. Speaking of which, this is the main menu, where you can load and edit organisms and maps, manage your genetic database, and tweak game settings. Now that that is out of the way, we can get to the fun part. This is the sea of simulation, where all the creatures are born. The game generates them by recombining genes from your genetic database, using graph prioritization algorithms that take into account environmental conditions, connections between genes, the ratings and markers assigned by the neural net. This is a plane element. It creates a gravitational field that attracts organism atoms. By default, only atoms with a specific option can physically interact with it, as with a surface. But you can toggle this setting in the Settings section of the main menu. This is a star, a primary source of energy for your organisms, aside from eating each other. Stars are great indicators of health of your ecosystem. They colour the background, and you can see how much energy there is in the area by its brightness. White and pale blue is usually a good sign, whilst black or orange mean a catastrophe is waiting to happen. These three elements together create a life cycle that can last an eternity, where biological epochs change and dominant species shift from plants to predators and back. Specialised survival mechanics emerge, and all you need to do is sit back and watch life unfold by itself. Or you can take action and interfere. Create your own organisms and introduce them in the ecosystem. Design new environments to shape the future of your world and get the system to its maximum potential.
What you are seeing is a visual representation of your genetic database. In this menu, you can manage genes in your ecosystem and create gene signatures of your own, although the statistics show that it will be better if you don't touch anything and just let things be.
Your user status gives you a number of godlike powers, the most important one being the power to destroy. This button disintegrates your selected organism. We are not saying you should use it, but we are also not saying you should not. This button clears your environment to an empty void. The second power is controlling time. There are two values of movement speed for the creatures and for the robots, represented by the outer and the inner rings of this circular panel. As far as we know, this is the first time in video games and sci-fi that a UI element of this design actually provides useful information. You can drag the organisms by clicking one of their atoms, toggling your helper unit and the generation of new organisms. It is very important that you feel in control of the situation. The third power is creating life. This button loads a blank organism. You can use it to test the environmental conditions and modify it to create new organisms in the editing menu. Both Map and Organism editors have their own guides and tutorials. You can access them by pressing Q whilst in the editing mode. You are provided with a wide variety of tools to create organisms that swim, walk, fly, hunt, and communicate with each other. When creating a life form, bear in mind possible effects it can have on your ecosystem. These effects can spread globally through the network, so there is always a chance to create a plague or a dominant species that will populate or destroy other players' simulations. These are options you can apply to atoms of your organism. As always, you can learn about each of them by pressing Q when hovering over its icon. These three buttons let you change the size of your organism, its structural integrity, and the mass of its atoms. You can also change the mass of individual atoms using the scroll wheel. In most cases, atoms with greater mass increase the effectiveness of their options. You can shape your organism by dragging its atoms along axes and making other atoms follow the selected one by combining the drag with the scroll wheel. When you confirm editing, the atoms will be locked in their new positions. Grey lines between atoms represent their connections. Darker lines indicate stronger connections. The stronger the connection is, and the further apart the atoms are, the more energy it will require. You can edit the connections individually by right-clicking an atom and applying a scroll wheel to its connected atoms. Cut the connections by left and right clicking simultaneously and then crossing the lines with your cursor. Cut the connections of a single atom the same way by first selecting it with a right click. This button takes you to the Neural Editing menu, where you can manage the nervous system of your organism, make it respond to the signals from sensors, and activate atoms options. This is the nervous system editor. The area in the centre is a working space where you can drag neurons from the menu below. If atoms of your organism have sensor type options, their input will be represented by a set of panels on the right. If it has any actuator type options, their output will be shown with a similar set of panels on the left. You can connect neurons and panels by right-clicking and dragging from one neuron to another. The neuron icons have several interactive elements. You can learn about them by pressing Q whilst hovering over them. This way you can also learn about different types of neurons. Speaking of which, Organism's nervous system is a part of a neural network, which means that it can learn and improve itself through generations. Since nervous systems act differently in various conditions, it is hard to judge their efficiency by a life story of a single organism. Because of this, they typically evolve outside player simulations on the cloud. However, there are several experimentation protocols the system will try on promising organisms to speed up this process. You don't need to worry about that. Nervous systems are not bound to a single organism and often merge together, travelling across species. Because of this, you typically see only a fraction of the overall neural network, and your contributions to it will have a global effect, even if you are creating a nervous system from scratch. As you can see, there are several types of neurons you can apply. It is not typical for a neural net. Furthermore, neural nets usually have a rigid structure, where the neurons are divided into layers, and signals between them travel one way from an upper layer to a lower one. Some types allow neurons to send signals back to the upper layers, but these cases are rare and strictly defined as well. In our network, there is no layer system, and you are free to connect the neurons any way you want. Whilst this makes things harder for us, it also makes experimentation easier for the user and gives the network some very interesting options, like developing memory and moving from a simple reactionary system to a more complex one. Fun fact: your helper unit, as well as all other robots with physics-based movements, possess a nervous system of their own, which is a bit ironic in that it was actually easier for us to let the thing learn to move on its own, rather than write an algorithm for it. Finally, you can click the Name panel to rename your organism and confirm editing, which automatically saves it. You can learn about nervous system design, as well as the organism editing, in the Organism Creation tutorial. If you're in this editor for the first time, chances are that you're seeing a formation of white cubes all around you. These cubes serve as a grid that lets you precisely place environmental elements. You can toggle the grid with this button and change the grid scale by applying the scroll wheel to it. This set of icons represents different map elements you can apply. Simply drag one to a grid cube using left click. If your selected element is a type of plane, like surfaces or seas of simulation, you will also need to click 2 more cubes to designate the 3 vertices of a plane. You can reposition the elements the same way. If you want to add more vertices to a plane, right-click and drag to a grid cube of one of the already existing vertices. If the grid is turned off, the elements will appear at the centre of your camera frame, and you will be able to move them along axes, just as with atoms in creature editing. One can also change element properties, like the size of a star or the gravitational force of a surface with the scroll wheel. Finally, this button resets your starting camera position to the current one. You will start at this position the next time you load the map. When you confirm editing, this map will be designated as a default one and will load the next time you launch the game. If you want to change the starting map, simply load one you prefer and it will be set as a default instead. To counter your current emotional state, you first need to learn the basics of the user interface. We tried